First tonight, Yarlswood Immigration Centre is condemned over the detention of children.
The Chief Inspector of Prisons says children there are being held unnecessarily with little thought being given to their welfare. It's the latest in a series of criticisms of the way children are treated while awaiting deportation from the UK. Sally Chidzoy reports.
British-born Ibrahim Sentongo was 4 years old when he was detained at Yarlswood with his family. His mother says his time in detention triggered flashbacks and anxiety problems.
He's really not in good position, especially when he sees the people putting on white and black. His always memory thinks about the detention centre, Yarlswood. I think it's not a detention centre, it sees a prison.
Yarlswood is the largest immigration detention centre for women and children in the UK. Here, illegally, they are held while they await deportation. But it is the welfare of children being held that is the focus of criticism by the Chief Inspector of Prisons.
Well, I think what children were telling us was that it felt like prison, that sometimes they were worried about their parents who were in detention with them. One child who'd been detained just before doing mock GCSE exams and worried about his education. So clearly worries. And when you add to that the fact that half of the families detained at Yarlswood are later temporarily released back into the community and not immediately deported, you have to ask questions about whether the right questions are being asked at the point of detention and whether detention really is exceptional and necessary and for the shortest possible period.
A baby recently spent 100 days in detention at Yarlswood. The report also says on 2 occasions force had been used against children to separate them from their families. In her report, Dame Anne Owers said in a 6-month period 420 children had been held in the family unit and that many were distressed.
There are alternatives to locking up families with children. For example, the Home Affairs Select Committee last year recommended that practice should stop and that there should be tougher reporting requirements. We know that families generally don't abscond. They don't run away, they've got nowhere to hide.
The report says management needs to do more to provide support and activities for women. There are some positives. Yarlswood is said to be safer and conditions have reportedly improved. But any progress made at the centre will always be overshadowed by the practice of detaining children. Sally Chidzoy, BBC Look East.
Well, earlier this afternoon I spoke to the Immigration Minister, Phil Willis, and first asked him for his reaction to the Inspector of Prisons' recommendation that children shouldn't be held at Yarlswood.
Well, her report shows that there has been huge improvement since the fire there a few years ago. But on the point about children, she's making a policy point that we disagree with. She's saying that we shouldn't be detaining children. We're saying that, sadly, we have to.
But the report says that the detention of children, affects them greatly. We've heard stories of bedwetting, fear of men in uniforms, and ultimately half the children in the report were actually released. So should they be there in the first place?
Well, that accusation is false. Of course, the people who are there are people who've refused to abide by the decisions of the courts to return to their own countries. So it's not our decision to detain their children. It's the decision not to abide by the court ruling. On the point about people being released, if you have vexatious judicial review claims and it drags it out, we do sometimes, on the instruction of the court, after release. But most of those people are subsequently re-detained and deported. And that, I think, brings the trauma in. So the government are in a very difficult position. We take our welfare responsibilities very seriously, but it's not fair to say that we shouldn't detain children when these people, unfortunately and sadly, have refused to abide by the court's decisions.
The report does also say that on 2 occasions in the past year that force was used on children being removed in preparation for their deportation. That surely is unacceptable.
Well, sadly, again, we have had incidents of teenagers, attacking our officers, refusing to comply with the orders of the court. It sounds very harsh and difficult to say that children have force used against them, but I can assure you that the measures, the independent inspection and the measures we take are very humane. But what am I to do if I'm faced with a 6-foot-tall teenage boy who's attacking one of my guards? I have to give the guards protection.
But it's not just the Chief Inspector of Prisons who's damning with this report. There are other people as well. The Refugee Council has called for an urgent rethink in government policy.
Well, we stand by our policy of the need to detain people who refuse to abide by the decisions. These people are people who have had appeals, they've lost them, they've reached the end of the judicial process. We have reason and evidence to show that they have absconded or would likely to be absconded, and we have to manage the asylum system. Asylum in this country is at a 20-year low. We have to look after the genuine asylum seekers and the taxpayer, enforce the rules of the court. So it's not my choice to detain children. It's the consequence of the persistent refusal to abide by the decision. And there is no evidence that people who have been returned home who failed their asylum claims have come to harm, despite some of the wild claims that are made to the contrary.
Mr Willis, thanks very much.
Thank you.